Mr. President, I am pleased to come and talk today. This was a week where we had all anticipated a return to the Senate where ideas are widely debated. I was standing by the majority leader last week when he was talking about this and said, we will let 1,000 flowers bloom. Didn't sound like something that Senator McConnell would normally use as a reference, but he did. And I'm thinking, well, that would be a good thing to see 1,000 different ideas widely debated on the Senate floor. So far this week, there's not been any debate because we can't seem to agree on who votes on what first. I think that's a particular level of dysfunction that we should all be concerned about. For the Senate to do its work, we have to be willing to vote, and we have to be willing to take some hard votes. My sense of politics today is whether you've taken the vote or not, someone's going to accuse you of taking that vote. You might as well not worry about the votes you take, just worry about the work we get done and whatever votes are necessary to be taken to get that done. On this topic, it does seem to me that we have two issues here that should be solved. Two issues where there's broad agreement. You know, I have said for a long time that there are really three questions in the immigration debate that need to be answered. And one is, how do we secure the border? And two is, what are the legitimate workforce needs of the country? And three is, what do we do with people who came or stayed illegally? And as we think about securing the border, by the way, half the people who are in the country illegally came legally and just stayed. So it's not all a border issue, but it clearly is partly and significantly a border issue. One of the things that people expect a government to be able to do is to secure its own borders. Often when you hear the story of a country somewhere in the world where the government has disintegrated and is no longer in control of the country, one of the first things that mentioned by people talking about that dysfunctional government is they don't control their own borders. It truly is a legitimate expectation of a functioning government that you'd control your own borders. It's also a legitimate expectation of a government that you'd look at your economy, you'd look at what workforce needs you have that aren't being met, and figure out the best way to meet those workforce needs. And then in this debate, because we haven't controlled our borders and because we haven't kept track of people who legally crossed our borders, so we've got some number of people, usually estimates about 11 million people in the country who are not here legally. What do we do with those people? Now, my view, Mr. President, has always been that if the government met its primary responsibility, which is an immigration system that works, that the American people would be very forward-leaning about those other two issues, because nobody really argues that if we don't have people here to do the work that needs to be done, whether it's highly skilled or not highly skilled, that we ought to be thinking about what do we need to do to get people here who do that work? What do we need to do to keep people here who came here to get training to do highly skilled jobs and graduated from colleges and universities or other skill-enhancing things that happened while they were here? If they want to stay, my view, Mr. President, is they didn't do anything that got them in trouble while they were here. We should almost always want them to stay. Why wouldn't we want that skill set in our economy? If we don't have it, why wouldn't we come up with the ways to reach out and get it? And then those who are not here legally, I think people generally, if they thought the problem was solved, if they thought that the government truly had met its responsibility to operationally control the borders, that government had met its responsibility to keep track of who comes in legally and know if they have left or not. I mean, there's no retail store in America that doesn't have a better sense of its inventory than we do of whether people who have legally come into the country and checked in with a customs officer, we don't know if they've left or not. Couldn't tell you in weeks, perhaps, whether somebody is still here or not, even if they did everything exactly the way you were supposed to do it. And this debate, largely driven by the most sympathetic of all those groups, and that group of people who came here, who were brought here by someone else, often their own parents, who were brought here by someone else, who entered the country illegally, but have grown up in America. Now, my first response to that, and I think the response of most Americans when they've thought about that, is kids who grew up here, kids who went to school here, kids who haven't gotten in bad trouble while they were here, kids who have no real memory or connection with the country that they were brought from. Of course we want them to stay. Of course we want them to be part of our economy. Of course we want them to be part of a vital, and because they are who they are, an even younger society than we would be without them. Why wouldn't we want that to happen? And so, Mr. President, you've got two issues here that on the idea of people who are raised here, who have done everything that anybody else would do to acclimate as an American in all ways, who went to school here, who did everything else here. 70 or 80% of the American people, I occasionally see a number even higher than that, believe they should be allowed to stay. More and more as people think about that, they also believe that after they've been here, like any other immigrant who came to the country legally, that they would eventually be able to take the test, to go through the process, to become a citizen. That is a widely accepted premise that this debate should be built on. Another widely accepted premise that this debate should be built on is 70% or so of the American people, and a higher percentage if people really knew the facts, believe that the government has not met its responsibility to secure our own borders. So let's assume that that number is 70. So you've got two 70% issues that you would assume that a working Congress could take two 70% issues and come up with a solution that makes its way to the president's desk and solves both of these problems. Now, we're not going to solve these problems by saying, okay, we're going to solve the problem for people who are already here, but we're not going to do anything that makes it harder for others to be brought here illegally by someone who has control of them. We're not going to solve that part of it. Of course, that's not going to work. I know there was one bill at least proposed where the DACA kids, and whether you signed up or not, I don't think that should be a determiner. And apparently the president agrees that if you're here in that category of kids who were brought here and grew up here, it doesn't matter what reason you had for not signing up as a DACA kid, you can still be part of that overall discussion of how you get to stay. And you still get to stay if we can come up with a solution for you to do that. But we're not going to solve that problem and saying we'll have a study of the other problem to see what's wrong. If by now we largely don't know what's wrong with the other problem, we are never going to figure out what's wrong with the other problem. In 1986, Mr. President, long before either of us came to Congress, and maybe long before some of us graduated from high school in 1986, we were going to solve this problem. Everybody who was here illegally could stay if they wanted to, and the borders would be made secure. So here we are, over 3 decades later, still debating the same thing. We need to solve these problems, both of them, and if we can solve other problems while we're doing it, that's fine too. But we need to be able to come up with a solution. Now that means if there are a number of ideas out there as to how the Senate should move forward, and one of them as well is just let the kids say that signed up. And by the way, on the DACA issue, it's important to remember here that President Trump said, I'm going to give the Congress 6 more months to solve this problem up until March the 5th. It's also important to know that the courts have allowed people to continue to sign up. So really the March 5th deadline is somewhere beyond March the 5th. But the president said, I'm going to give the Congress 6 more months. But the president also, the president before him, President Obama, didn't do anything about this for years, not because he didn't want to, I believe, but because he said he didn't have the ability to. President Obama repeatedly said the president cannot solve this problem. This has to be the Congress solving the problem. And he ultimately decided, well, in spite of 6 or 7 years of saying I can't solve this problem on my own, I'm going to try to with an executive order. And the truth is that that executive order was never going to do the job. I think President Obama knew that. President Trump, when he did his own order, he probably also knew he didn't have the ability to do that any more than President Obama had to do what he did. But both of these presidents in their own way have tried to drive the Congress toward making a decision that comes up with a plan that works. A plan that works for kids who were brought here with no choice in the matter, and a plan for seeing that kids still can't be easily brought here with no choice. We need to let young people come here because we need them here as part of our workforce, as part of our country. Legal immigration is what made America great. The rule of law is also what makes our country what it is. And you can't continue to let immigration be an area where we have decided there are laws that we will not enforce. And so the challenge for the Congress right now is to come up with a combination of this problem is not going to continue to be the same problem it is today, but for the problem today, we're going to solve it. And we're going to solve it in a way that lets kids who grew up here become part of the solution. I continue to be committed to strengthening our borders. I continue to be committed to stemming the tide of illegal immigration. Frankly, I continue to be committed to the idea of legal immigration as part of continually reinforcing and enthusing who we are. But I'm also committed to finding a permanent solution for young people who would be in that category of kids who were brought here, grew up here, haven't gotten in trouble while they were here, and have every reason to want to be part of the American dream and part of the American people that they have been part of up till now. I hope we can find common ground on a bill that does that. I hope we can pass a bill from the Senate that the House will also pass. You know, if the senators think they've done their job by passing a bill that can't possibly pass the House, that's just another kicking the can down the road. We need to find a solution here that really solves this problem, and you solve this problem by putting a bill on the president's desk. To do that, we're going to have to vote. We can't do that by just having a quorum call or a vacancy here on the Senate floor. We have to be willing to vote. There are some things I can vote that I'll enthusiastically vote for, and some things I will reluctantly not be able to be for. But that doesn't mean that I should say if I can't be for whatever is brought to the Senate floor, I don't want to vote on it. I don't want to debate it. We can't continue to tune in to a vacant screen of the United States Senate floor and saying this is the week that we've all committed. We're going to have a real debate about solving as many problems as we can that relate to kids who grew up here and were not ever here in ways that they should have been here, and solving that problem so other kids are not likely in these numbers to face that same problem in the future. And so, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and hope that the floor is filled over the next couple of days with a vigorous debate about the best way to solve the problem before us in a way that the people we work for will feel good about it, and the people who are most impacted by our decision will feel equally the concern, the warmth, the desire of our country to have a vibrant economy that has people who want to be part of it, able to be part of it, and particularly people who grew up in the United States of America be part of it. And I would yield.